Hi guys, welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. Today I'm going to be reviewing Boosh, The Hammer by K.J. Parker. So I read this book along with Gregory LaPerche over on his channel. He just has a co-host for a buddy read and a live show every month, and this is what his server voted on, but really just like 5 of us read it, and Gregory isn't really even enjoying it all that much. And this is unsurprising. Zara and I have come to the conclusion that we are destined to be modern-day Cassandras, talking about the wonders of K.J. Parker. But I do understand that K.J. Parker is not for everyone, but for me, K.J. Parker is so brilliant and so good at what he does. And so that's what I'm going to attempt to do here today, is to talk about what The Hammer's about. This book is deeply thematic and incredibly well structured as far as foreshadowing and thematic elements that reappear later. It is a deep and dense book, and also an incredibly bleak one. I do not recommend The Hammer as your first K.J. Parker book. Please, if you can, read Purple and Black, which demonstrates many of the things that he is good at, and it's a novella. It's very short. If not, The Folding Knife is a more fun foray into the realm of Parker. There's nothing fun about this book. It is heavy, and it is slow, and very bleak. But I freaking love it. I love this book. So,
plenty of ditches along the road. Maybe I'll find one to die in.
The Hammer tells the story of the Mettock family, which is this noble family that was exiled, we don't know what for, but it was exiled from what they refer to as home, which is just this kind of coastal mega city. And they were exiled, and they're never allowed to come back. They've been there for like a generation. And they've been banished to this island called the Colony. But the irony is they're this noble family, and they live up on this plateau called the Tabletop that's above the town, or above town, capital T. And they're not wealthy. They don't have really any money. Our main character has never seen coinage before, but they work their farm. They have most of the good timber up there, and anything they need. And the farm is really falling apart because they don't have really materials to replace it, and they just like slapdash everything. And if they need something, they just go in the town to steal from them. They have such contempt for the people in town that they'll just steal it, they conduct raids, and then bring it back. And so the father, the patriarch of the Mettock clan, he is determined that they are one day going home. And everything about him, every decision or anything he does is always with that belief that one day his family will be out of disgrace and they'll go home. But our main character is the youngest son of the Mettocks, and his name is Gignami. And really, there are 4 main characters in this book. Gignami is by far the protagonist, but our 3 main secondary characters are Furio, who is Gignami's best friend. He's the nephew of the guy who runs the shop, who runs basically the general store in town. We have Marzo, who is Furio's uncle, who again runs the general shop, and then Luso, who is the middle brother of the Mettock clan, who is really kind of like the violent one, the security, the peacekeeping one. He's the one that leads the raids down to steal things from town. And just from the beginning, the prologue is fantastic. The prologue, it's one of those prologues that you're just like, okay, cool, what was the point? But it is so rich in characterization, in the shadows of what's to come, of mirroring some actions and themes later in the novel. It's just absolutely brilliant. From the second page, we get an example of Parker's masterclass at characterization. I think Parker is one of the best in the business when it comes to kind of indirectly characterizing. I think his character work is so incredible. Just with this line on the second page, he gives you in one sentence everything you need to know about how the Mettock feel about the people, the commoners who live in town. So something is killing their chickens, and one of his brothers is like, it's probably a stray dog from town. And so Gignami thinks, that makes sense. Town was a strange, barbarous place where common people lived, barely human. So with just this line, we get how the Metocs feel about their own status versus the people in town. Barely human, barbarous. Town is this foreign place that nobody goes to, and they're so better than them. They're such a higher order, more civilized than they are. And that's one of the questions that is asked a lot. One of the main themes running through this book is civilized versus savage. I've been reading a lot of books that deal with this recently. What is it that makes someone civilized versus being a savage? And a lot of it has to do with point of view and what your criteria are for each of those things. It's like what Ben Franklin said. Rebellion is always legal in the first person, our rebellion. It's only in the third person, their rebellion, that it becomes illegal. And so at the heart of this novel is Gignami. Everything revolves around Gig. And Gignami is a brilliant character, but fundamentally tragic. Like, from the beginning, he is just... We see how brilliant he is. I do not know an author who is better at showing us the intelligence of a character rather than telling us. If you are an aspiring writer and you want to be able to write believable characters who are brilliant, you should read Parker's works. Now, that tends to be the kind of characters he writes, but it's very interesting to compare Gignami with the protagonist from another Parker novel, Folding Knife, Basso the Magnificent, whom I love, because both characters are brilliant in their own right. But the tragedy of Gignami, so Gignami, both characters are willing to do what needs to be done. They are willing to take personal sacrifice to do the job that needs doing. And Basso, by dint of being older and involved in the political world, kind of has his eye on everything. So while Gignami is handling this very, very small colony, Basso is handling the entire Vasani Republic. And so Basso has a very macro view on things, on what goosing this part of the economy is going to do here, how to handle plague in the city. But Gignami has a much kind of smaller role. Gignami is the smartest in his family, for sure, except maybe his father. But he does not like his family and doesn't really have a purpose with them. He does not want to work the farm like Luso or his oldest brother, Stheno. He does not believe that they're ever going to go home. He does not fit in with the Metoc, but down in town, he also doesn't fit in there. Because he's a Metoc, everyone knows the youngest son of the Metoc. He's not really well liked down in the town either, especially considering that his middle brother Luso comes down and raids and, burns houses when he feels like it or whatever. We see him as, I think he's 21 when the main narrative of this takes place, so he's a young guy. Unlike Basso, who we go past Basso's 21st year in like chapter 3, and then he's an adult just running the Vasani Republic. Here, the entire book takes place in this 21st year of Gignami's life. And also, unlike Basso, Basso is incredibly confident of his own competence and knows exactly what he is capable of. Basso has a plan from the start. He knows how to execute it. He knows his own abilities. He only has other people telling him that he can't do the things that he wants to do. He is beyond confident. Gignami does not have that confidence because he is still struggling with his own ability, what he's capable of doing. He can be callous at times, especially with his friend Furio. He almost treats Furio as a means to an end, but Gignami also desperately needs Furio to remind him of his own humanity, that he is a person and not just this tool in search of a purpose. Because there's a lot of talk about things and how things and one tiny thing can change everything. Like how the invention of the crossbow changed warfare forever. Because to use a bow requires training and practice. Anyone can load a crossbow arrow, point, and shoot. And that changed warfare. Things like that. And Gignami, as he searches for this purpose, believes that everything, every tool, is built and made and crafted for a purpose. And he kind of scornfully mocks his peers, other humans, for believing that people have a purpose. And this, again, this is ironic because Gig is searching for that purpose, but he views himself less as person. He feels a lot of loss of agency because as the book goes on, he really believes that the job that he is setting out to do can only be done by him. And as such, he is less human with free will and agency and more tool built and crafted for this purpose specifically. And so as Gig tries to fit in and achieve what he believes is his life's goal down in the town, he simultaneously wants to not be like his family and also is like his family. He can't really assimilate with the town because of his own monstrous arrogance. Gignami is arrogant and still kind of believes that he is better than them. After all, he is a Metok. He just thinks he's smarter than them. Gig talks a lot about the books that he reads and learns things from books, but knows when the books are not actually helping you, but actually telling you things that aren't true or making things more complicated than they need to be. He tells Furio that stupid people should never write books in case stupider people believe them. The world has difficulty in real life of fools writing things that are foolish, but people who are even more foolish end up believing the foolish things. It's absolutely bonkers. And also this idea that the lie that progress is always good, that as long as there's technological progress, that is the optimal thing to do. And he also addresses what he calls the fallacy of progress, that people think that over time, we as humankinds get smarter because we've become more civilized or, we're a more advanced or enlightened society. So therefore, we're smarter than the people that came before us. We can do things always better than the people that came before us. And Gignami firmly does not believe that. And he draws some parallels. He doesn't use the Romans, but he draws parallels to this civilization that had better engineering techniques. For example, concrete that sets underwater, like the Romans, that the civilizations that came after the Romans did not have that. They could not achieve many of the marvels that the Romans did. Historians used to call it the Dark Age, and now there's pushback against that. No one calls it the Dark Age anymore. But the idea that just because time has passed, we are now more evolved, more civilized as a species. Gig is it's hard following Gignami because at no point do you really feel like he is happy? It is very heavy. It's very cynical outlook on life. Gignami thinks about how razor thin that edge between misery and happiness is. How one thing can go wrong, and all of a sudden your day that was great now is a terrible day. We can all find examples of this. I know that when I'm in a good mood, I feel productive, and then I go and I mess with my computer, and for some reason, my freaking video editor will just freeze up. And all of a sudden, this good positive energy, this good feeling that I had is now gone. And now my night is ruined by one tiny thing. You're looking forward to something, and then everything happens exactly how you wanted except one thing. But you were really looking forward to everything going exactly as you want. And now you just ignore all the things that went right. That razor-thin line between misery and happiness. As I said, Gignami doesn't really feel guilt about doing what needs to be done. Gignami feels that he is the only one who will do things that are unpleasant, that have to be done for no other reason than it has to be done. And to this end, because of that, we see how manipulative Gig can be, about how public perception of something, if you can manipulate people into circumstances, very public circumstances, you can force people's hands because there's a bunch of eyes on them and they don't have a choice but to go along with what you want them to do, provided that you know where that person's button is. As long as you know the breaking point or that tipping point for a human, for someone around you, they can be manipulated as long as you get them in the position where it becomes impossible for them to refuse. But counter to that, the book also deals with what happens when people's hands are forced. It deals with the consequences of people being manipulated and how that affects how that affects the relationships of all the people in the town, because the colony is really small, and once a year or during the spring, the home sends these ships, and everything that the colony produces goes back with the ships, and they take the beef cows and everything, so really everything they make belongs to home, and the company buys it on the cheap, and they don't have a choice. And so again, through that, we explore themes of independence, themes of rebellion. And so through that relationship, or lack of, Parker explores the ideas of independence and rebellion, and how much one owes your motherland. As he's exploring these themes of identity, Gignami and the Metok and the townspeople, everyone is really wrestling with identity, and how tightly we hold to the labels that we and others have given to ourselves. Just think about all of the things that you are. I am a this. I am a this. Again, never look at politics, because politics is poison. But how strongly we hold to our identities, even when there is evidence to the contrary. How Gignami's father holds on to the fact that he is from home, that they are nobility, even though they live on a farm that's falling apart. They have no money. How are they nobles other than he says so? The fact that they're going to go home, despite every evidence that they're not going to. It's just really, really interesting. And again, that play of savage versus civilization. Home thinks that the colony are a bunch of savages. On the colony, there's actually a group of rumored savages. The townspeople think the Metoks are savages because of how violent they are, while the Metok think that the townspeople are savage and uncivilized. And so, it looks at imperialism and colonization and cultural subsumation and eradication and all other shuns, and the literal destruction of an entire culture just by ignoring their existence, pretending in your mind that a culture does not exist, therefore it does not exist. It's just all very, very fascinating. It's like everything that happens is just dripping with subtext. So probably my favorite thematic element being explored in here is the ideal and the conflict of justice versus peace, about how these two things are mutually exclusive. And this kind of manifests in the fact that because their colony is so small, both Metok and town person, when a crime or something horrible has occurred and something needs to be redressed, if you mete out justice and then someone else swears to mete out justice on you for taking revenge on this person, there's no room for blood feuds because there aren't enough people. Pretty soon, you can't have justice because with a community this close, someone is going to take revenge on their neighbor, they're going to take revenge on their neighbor until there's nobody left. And so, instead, you do what you can to try to keep the peace. And if that means that some horrible things have to be swept under the rug or aren't punished to the extent that one wants, that is the price that you pay for peace in our time. And there's this constant pull between these characters. Luso, Gig's middle brother, he always is talking about we gotta be practical about this. We need to keep the peace because higher ideals are fine. But Luso believes he lives in the real world with real world situations, and being practical involves keeping the peace, not stirring people up, not taking the justice that, you know what, maybe is deserved. But is that right? Can people exist in a society where justice can't be had and justice is sacrificed on the altar of peace? We also see the idea that just because justice is done doesn't necessarily mean that anything good came from it. Can good come from something that is ipso facto, on its face, bad? Can good come from evil? And the thing with Parker is there's very rarely a clear answer. These are very, there's heavy books that, often aren't super jovial. And also it explores the ideas of, is it worth it to defeat your enemy if to defeat them you have to become them? The idea of private grief and how people may be suffering even when you don't know, and how sometimes even if justice is not done, people are privately paying their penance the way they know how, rather than this public inaction of justice. Lusso even says that justice is just a fancy name for public revenge. And that's interesting. Now, this book is called The Hammer, and this metaphor is not subtle. The hammer is mentioned all of the time. So the Folding Knife explores politics and economics, really delves into that. This book doesn't really delve into any kind of specific trade other than, I guess, ironworking and building a factory. Goes really into on how to build like a massive, like kind of automated, like blacksmithing press. And this is the titular hammer in its most physical form. But also Gignami is the hammer on the pistol that flicks forward and ignites the spark of, the book's plot. The tabletop and growing up in the Metok's house was the hammer that forged young Gignami into the person we see in this novel. And how Gignami for town is the hammer of progress that propels everyone forward into a new era. And I mentioned these other three characters. Lusso, that I've talked about before, has a fascinating relationship with Gignami and with Marzo, the uncle who owns the general store. Parker does a fantastic job with setting up the kind of unreliability of our POV characters. Lusso is not a POV, but we get POVs from both Marzo and Gignami. So we only ever see Lusso through their eyes. And when we're in Gig's head, everybody that we see and everything we know about anything is filtered through Gignami's perspective. So it's really interesting when we're in Furio's head and we see how he views his friend, or how Marzo views Gignami and the Metoks. Lusso is a much richer and layered character than Gignami leads us to believe at the very beginning, as just being his brute of a brother. Marzo's character arc, from Marzo as he is engulfed in schemes, continually laments he just wanted to sell people stuff for slightly more than it was worth, and he finds all of this responsibility heaped upon him. Furio contrasts kind of with Ilias from Folding Knife, and Furio is far less capable than Ilias was, but he serves as that kind of link to humanity, because both Basso and Gignami desperately need a friend. But though Furio is incompetent, his role is so important and so crucial to his relationship with Gignami. Both he and Gig wonder about the complicity of a bystander. We have this in our society now. It's called the bystander effect, where everyone thinks that someone else is going to be the one to interfere in this crime that's taking place. So Parker talks about that as well. So, guys, there's a ton in this. I think this is a fascinating character study on the human condition and what it is like to hold on to grief and to do what you feel needs to be done. Parker is as I've said, he's a brilliant writer. He has incredible descriptions, just turns of phrases that I just absolutely love. Just like Terry Pratchett has really specific descriptions. Like when Gig is reminiscing about when he was a kid, he talks about how he doesn't even have any fondness for his clothes or shoes because they were issued to him like a kit to a soldier, rather than something that was very deeply personal to him. Or this one, just as the road into town was really only suggestion in the grass, town itself was 24 buildings, which gave the impression they'd been left lying about after someone had finished playing with them. Like, I know exactly what that looks like. Any of us who have been around freaking kids know what blocks look like after they're done being played with. And in this line as well, he supposed he should have been pleased, particularly since Stheno didn't give him anything else to do. Instead, he felt aimless and somehow disappointed, as though he'd closed his eyes for a kiss that never came. Surely, maybe it's just me, surely we know how that feels. His writing is just very evocative of other imagery. This I love because it's literally me when being asked to do manual labor. So they were far too heavy to lift. Furio opened the tailgate and leaned a couple of strong planks on the wagon bed, then proceeded to dance a slow, ungainly dance with each barrel, tipping, rocking, and edging it to the back of the wagon, tripping it over on its side and letting it roll down the planks. Gignami made a half-hearted offer to help while doing his best to look frail and ill. Tusser just stood and watched, confident in the immunity of being a girl. Oh, no, can I help? But it's brilliant. Parker is very, very clever and has a really dry, sardonic wit. The Tusser that I mentioned, she is a more minor character, but she is someone else from home who really wants to be a surgeon. And she left and came here, or she was sent here for something. But the great irony is that they're so far removed from civilization. Again, the colony is savage and they're civilized, that no one cares. Like, no one bats an eye that she wants to be a doctor here. So she has the freedom to practice what she loves here in the backwoods colony where propriety dictated she could not back home. So guys, again, Parker is not for everyone. This book is slow. It is a character study and a study on the human condition and the things that grief and the quest for identity make us do. It is not exciting. For the first 2/3, it appears listless. We have to assume motivations for several people, but at that 66% mark, it is almost unputdownable. Once things start falling into place and you realize everything that's really at play, it just races downhill and you pray it's not going where you think it's going. It's so good. It's really, really good. I love KJ Parker. He is doing something so unique in this space. So guys, on the Kingfin approval system, I give this book a superb. It is a superb book. I think that it might be a better book overall than The Folding Knife, just because of how it is framed and how perfectly everything is plotted and falls into place. But I think I like The Folding Knife better. I definitely like The Folding Knife better because Basso, I love Basso. Like, I love Basso. I love what is happening in The Folding Knife more than The Hammer. But I think from an objective perspective, The Hammer might be the better book. Maybe. Who knows? Out of 5 stars, 5 stars easily. I never walk away from a KJ Parker book without it stuck in my thoughts for days, weeks, who knows, maybe months at a time. I'm still thinking about Folding Knife on the regular, and I read it back in, May? June? Something like that. I read it at least 6 months ago, and I still think about The Folding Knife. And I know I'll be thinking about The Hammer long after I've put it down. So guys, that is it for me for today. As always, information about my Patreon and Discord is down in the description, and I'll see you next time, guys.